Europe is full of interesting countries. These countries, of course, have their own rivalries. Some are friendly, while some are literally blowing up. Let's explore the historical rivalries of different European countries. Now, I won't be going to it per detail, but an oversimplified view of each notable rivalry on the European continent. Let's start with the significant historical rivalries between great powers, then into middle powers. Starting in Western Europe, the most notable rivalry is between UK or United Kingdom, mostly England before, and France. As you may have guessed, these two fought each other a lot. It mostly started in Hundred Years' War, where England tried to dominate France through territorial conquest and succession to the French throne, but France kicked off England due to many factors including a certain Joan of Arc. The rivalry continued through the Protestant Reformation period and many wars in which both countries took opposing sides. However, England, now Britain, won against France in 7 Years' War, which killed any hopes for a French-dominated world. Napoleon had tried that, but in Europe, but again, they failed to break Britain's naval supremacy. Although both allies since then, as they have fought side by side in both World War I and World War II, many disagreements occasionally sprung up, like those in the Ruhr Crisis, and at one point when Francis Charles de Gaulle vetoed Britain's membership into the European Economic Community, now European Union. Today, the rivalry is friendly, like England boasting that its fish and chips are superior compared to French baguette. Speaking of France, it also has historical beef with Germany, more specifically Prussia. This started when France lost the Franco-Prussian War, in which it lost Alsace-Lorraine to the new German Empire. Of course, France hated Germany because of that, and they engaged in heavy trench warfare in World War I. France won, but 20 years later, the Third Reich knocked and forced France into surrender again. However, both countries are friendly since then, but poking fun is common, as the French have been poked as less hardworking and surrender-loving compared to Germany, and the French have poked fun of Germany for not having a sense of humor. Speaking of Germany, it also has a massive beef with Russia, which manifested in both world wars. Germany had always wanted to secure living space for Germans at the expense of Russia, and they looked down on Russians. Even though Russia was forced to make peace in World War I, its Russian bear is unleashed in Berlin at the end of World War II. Today, both countries still cooperate in economic sectors, and even during world wars, they have cooperated at the expense of all the countries between them. Speaking of Russia, it also has its own beef with Britain, and it mostly manifested in the Great Game, where both countries competed for influence in Central Asia. Britain didn't want Russia to become a naval power, so it stopped them by aiding the Ottomans against Russia in the Crimean War, which Russia lost. Before this, both were actually allied against Napoleon. Russia and Britain were both allied in World War I and World War II, but obviously, Britain isn't too keen on a communist country. Intense espionage was also orchestrated by the Soviets on Britain, while Britain has welcomed many Russian political exiles, refugees, and wealthy fugitives. Oh yeah, Britain also had its own rivalry with Germany. It culminated in the naval arms race because Britain also doesn't want a navally dominant Germany, and both world wars. Germany cannot invade Britain nor defeat its mighty navy though. Like France, both countries today have cordial relations. Now let's move on to the once prominent European great power, Austria, specifically the Habsburg monarchy, which has many rivals in its history. First, its rivalry with France. It's a long rivalry which stemmed when the Habsburgs dominated the Holy Roman Empire, the Low Countries, Spain, and northern Italy. Both countries fought various wars in their history. However, France survived, and after the French Revolution, Napoleon defeated Austria several times. Afterward, both countries were rivals for influence in northern Italy, but it largely ended after the Italian unification. The dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire ended the rivalry. Austria is also rivals with Russia in a different place, the Balkans. Austria, after losing its grip in Italy, sought to expand room in the Balkans by annexing Bosnia and Herzegovina, which upset Russia, which wanted the Balkans to be dominated by Russia's Slavic allies. You know that a certain Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Bosnia, and this is the final straw to World War I start. Russia and Austria fought hard, although both have collapsed and the rivalry is mostly no more. Finally, we have Prussia, another Austrian rival in German unification. Prussia obviously wants a Prussian-dominated Germany, and Austria can accept that. So, war. Prussia won, gaining the upper hand in German unification, which later led to the creation of the German Empire. This somehow killed the rivalry, as Austria also had a transformation to become a dual monarchy, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Otto von Bismarck of Germany reapproached Austria for an alliance, which they accepted because the others are now unacceptable, and they were in the same camp during World War I. Side note, Austria is now much smaller, and its influence has diminished after the loss of the Habsburg monarchy, so Austria can no longer exert its influence elsewhere. Also the reason why it got easily Anschlussed by the Third Reich in 1938. Moving on, Spain and Portugal. As brothers as they seem, they have their own rivalry. After discovering the New World, both countries wanted to dominate it, as well as trade routes, because of money. They did have an agreement on who gets what. However, Portugal and Spain later became part of the same union, although this fell apart pretty quickly. Today, the rivalry manifests in football matches. Back in Austria, it also has a fierce rivalry with Italy. Early on, Austria had dominated much of the Italian peninsula, and many Italians saw Austria as a barrier to unification. Italians did get their desired unification, but they wanted more at the expense of Austria. They did have a defensive alliance along with Germany, but Italy joined against Austria in World War I because they want more territory from them, although in the end they didn't get more as promised. Italy then tried to gain influence in Austria during fascist years, but Anschluss happened. Italy also has a rivalry with its western neighbor, France. Although France is actually instrumental to Italian unification, post-unification years have been quite intense, especially with Italian ambitions to expand Mediterranean influence. This culminated in a trade war in the 1880s, which prompted Italy to form a defensive alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary. While Italy wanted Tunisia, France gained it in the end. Even though Italy joined along with France in World War I, its failure to give Italians the promised land leads to extremism, roaming as Mussolini runs the show. Italy invaded France during World War II, but it was ultimately lost for Italy. Although both countries are economically integrated, present-day rivalry manifests in football matches, wine, fashion, EU leadership, and even Italian irredentist claims on Nice and Savoy. Moving back to Russia, it also has historical rivalries with other neighbors, such as Sweden and Turkey. The Swedish Empire was massive back then, and both countries engaged in many wars for control of the Baltics and Finland. Although Russia won in the Great Northern War against Sweden. Moving to Turkey, they've been rivals since the days of the Ottoman and Russian empires. This is down to the fact that Russia wanted to expand naval capabilities, protect the Christians in the Ottoman Empire, and of course, territorial conquest. This culminated in a series of Russo-Turkish wars, along with World War I. Even today, some form of rivalry is still present, as Turkey is a member of NATO and hosts American bases. And today, both countries are competing for influence in the Middle East and North Africa. Now let's cover the other European countries. Starting off with Romania and Hungary. I already made a video about it, but to oversimplify, the Romanian region of Transylvania was once ruled by Hungary, and it still hosts some Hungarian population after the Treaty of Trianon, which stripped Hungary about 70% of its land area. Hungary had tried hard to regain Transylvania, although it remained part of Romania up to today. Today, some Hungarian irredentists still claim it as rightfully Hungarian. Let's now enter the domain of the Balkans, Europe's most dysfunctional family. Starting with Greece, its largest rival is, Turkey. Greeks once ruled the Anatolian heartland until Turks settled it. The Ottoman Empire later grew in strength and dominated the Greek heartland for centuries until the Greek independence. Greece wished to expand north and east at the cost of the Ottoman Empire, and so they did. When the Ottomans lost World War I, its western areas were given to Greece, but the Turks kicked them out and established their modern borders, in which a population exchange has occurred between Greeks and Turks. Although they have reconciled and allies against the USSR in the Cold War, the old rivalry is revived in Cyprus, which both countries wanted. Today, they may coexist peacefully, but some tension may occasionally flare due to disputes. Now into Serbia, the one with a polarized reputation. It has extensive historical beef with Croatia and also with Albania due to different reasons. Serbs and Croats mostly speak the same language and are both South Slavs, but religion ultimately divided them. Serbs are mostly Orthodox while Croats are mostly Catholic. Different influences have also influenced their identity, foreshadowing I guess. Problems really began after the establishment of Yugoslavia, where Croats wanted federalization while Serbs wanted centralization. This division prompted some Croats to become more extremists and form their own faction called the Ustaše, which ruled the independent state of Croatia after Yugoslavia's capitulation in World War II. They conducted ethnic cleansing against Serbs, and many were perished as a result. Afterward, things remained calm during Tito years, but things heated up after Yugoslavia's collapse, where Serbs in Croatia wanted to secede, but Croatia was like, hell no. Croats eventually won, and here we are today. Things have cooled down, but the historical scars remain among the older generation. Meanwhile, Serbia's beef with Albania is mainly due to the whole Kosovo thing. To oversimplify, Kosovo is claimed as the rightfully Serbian province of Kosovo and Metohija, while the majority of Kosovo's population, which are ethnically Kosovar Albanian, would rather be independent. Albania itself obviously supports Kosovar self-determination, which causes beef with Serbia, and it still exists and unresolved until this day. Greece has another rival against North Macedonia, but it's mostly cultural and tied to identity. Greeks rightfully claim the term in usage of Macedonia as only applicable to Greek culture, while those in North Macedonia beg to differ. Before, North Macedonia was called the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and Greeks are annoyed by this circumstance. Although the whole naming dispute is a bit sordid, the whole identity thing remains up for debate. Now, deep into the Slavic world, Poland and Russia are historical rivals, and they engage in fighting a lot, mostly in Ukrainian and Belarusian lands, which is an area heavily influenced by both countries. Poland once captured Moscow, but of course it wouldn't last. Josep Pilsudski then fought the Soviets, which was kind of a stalemate. Poland was subjugated by Russians for quite a long time, from the Russian Empire years to the Communist years. Today, as part of NATO alliances, Poland is under protection by Western allies, while trying to expand some influence into Ukraine and Belarus. although Russia will want to keep both countries firmly under Moscow's influence. Other countries with notable rivalries include Denmark and Sweden, in which they fought a lot of wars, Britain and Ireland, mostly on the issue of Northern Ireland plus historical animosity, and Dutch rivalries with England, see reasons, along with Spain and even Germany because of football. Oh yeah, football rivalry, but that's for another video. Of course, there's also internal rivalries like England versus Scotland, Catalonia and Basque versus Spain interior, Northern Italy versus Southern Italy, Western Ukraine versus Eastern Ukraine, and many, many more. To summarize, rivalries happen due to the conflicting interests in different cultures. Some may be violent, some are friendly, and some are historical. Since the period of nationalism, more people are patriotic and nationalistic over their own country, and this leads to conflicting interests. But of course, Europe's best rivalry is obviously between the Isle of Man and Little Liechtenstein. Thank you for watching and please subscribe for more country neighbors.